With rising debt putting pressure on a new government, Washington assigned Alexander Hamilton to make a plan to help our financial problems. Hamilton's financial plan created tensions within Congress as representatives debated over the best method to solidify U.S. finances. Thomas Jefferson used his power and rallied representatives from southern states to oppose Hamilton's plan in favor of states handling their own debts. After 6 months of debate in Congress and rising tensions that threatened to split the nation apart, Hamilton, Madison, and Jefferson made a compromise to stop the rising conflict and strike a balance of power between states. This new financial plan included the federal absorption of state debts, protective tariffs on imports, and federal taxes to build revenue for the new government. This immediately led to the new financial system in the United States, and as a result, new debates over federal taxes. By 1791, a federal tax on whiskey led to additional tension with the Whiskey Rebellion. Decades later, the compromise still remains, and Hamilton's vision of a central banking system, protective tariffs, and taxation are still in place today. The Compromise of 1790 by Amanda Bartholio. In 1774, as the American Revolution became more of a reality, the First Continental Congress was formed to govern on behalf of the colonies separately. France, who was sympathetic to the cause, provided loans to the Continental Congress due to the high cost of the war. As a result, the U.S. had a total of $79 million of debt. As the Continental Congress gave way to a more organized government under the Articles of Confederation, financial issues like debt certificates grew. By 1786, financial tensions came to a tipping point in western and central Massachusetts with the start of the Shays' Rebellion. Many farmers in this area suffered from high debt as they tried to start new farms. Farms were seized and farmers arrested because Massachusetts did not have pro-debitor laws to solve this economic crisis. Daniel Shays, a former captain of the Continental Army, led the Shaysites in the first armed revolt. Though the Shaysites fell apart just after a few months, similar rebellions started happening in states like New York, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania. As the effects of Shays' Rebellion intensified, the need for an economic plan for the northern states became ever more pressing. Because the South had suffered no ill effects, the need for a plan was unimportant. By May of 1787, the Continental Congress decided to hold the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. This was because America's first Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, gave Confederate Congress the power to make rules and request funds from the states, but had no enforcement powers, couldn't regulate commerce or print money. Taxed with the revising of the existing government, the delegates came up with a completely new one. Wary about centralized power and loyal to their states, they created a powerful central government. The Constitution was ratified on July 2, 1788. A year later, the first presidential election was held and Washington won. The Federal Congress was formed the same year. Congress received a letter written on August 21, 1789, by Pennsylvania public creditors. In the letter, it stated, "The dignity and honor of the Union has made the payment of the public debt a fundamental principle of the government, and has also created an adequate power to discharge it." The creditors also stated, "Should Congress adjourn without any more decisive act for the restoration of public credit, the mere institution of offices or the regulation of imposts will hardly protect the American character from the desertion of its enemies." As a result, Congress made the Department of Treasury with Alexander Hamilton as the secretary. His first task was the report of public credit. His report proposed that Congress should fund the debt.
This would require a separate fund to be set aside to make regular and long-term payments on its interest. Making the separate fund meant changing the debt certificates issued during the Revolutionary War. Hamilton wanted a national bank to help organize everything. James Madison led the opposition towards two of his proposals. Madison opposed the creation of new debt certificates and converting the Revolutionary War state debts into federal debts. Thomas Jefferson used his power to spread the opposition. Hamilton's report started a fierce debate.
On February 6, Senator William Maclay of Pennsylvania published a newspaper article addressing the implications of the report. He wrote, "Blend the state debts with those of the Union, that thus a pretext may be afforded to seize all the sources of revenue and depress the state governments." Maclay argued that the financial plan was a scheme by Hamilton and his supporters to force state governments to be weaker than the federal government.
Representative Benjamin Goodhue of Massachusetts didn't think it mattered whether it was a state or federal problem, just the problem was unified. In 1790 letter to a friend, he stated, "Every consideration which will advance the future prosperity of these United States requires that those debts, whether in the hands of state or continental creditors, should stand on the same footing and receive a supply from one common fountain."
Representatives Theodore Bland and Agnes Burke had anti-federalist views on Hamilton's plan. In letters written at the time, Bland wrote as a concern, "I think I foresaw that the citizens of others are taxed up to the teeth for that purpose, and I must either go with the tide of power or become again a rebel, which is the best at my time of life." Bland viewed Hamilton's plan as a scheme and a way to take advantage of the states. Burke viewed Hamilton's plan as a way to add strength and power to the rebels that fight against it. Burke wrote to Samuel Bryan, "Congress is daily engaged on the report of Mr. Hamilton. I know no man in either house who is not totally at loss on this important subject. Funding the debt may or may not be a blessing or a curse to the people of America, and it will add strength and power to that faction that brought about the late revolution, and it will make their princely fortunes."
By spring of 1790, tensions between states made the survival of the Union in jeopardy. John Adams wrote a letter, "I really fear that some of my old friends, both in Virginia and Massachusetts, hold not in horror as much as I do a division of this continent into 2 or 3 nations, and have not an equal dread of civil war. In the South, fears of power imbalance arose because Congress met in New York. The South feared that the North had all the power, and Hamilton's plan reinforced that fear." Jefferson wrote his account of the compromise. It stated, "I proposed to him, however, to dine with me the next day, and I would invite another friend or two, bring them into conference together, and I thought it impossible best that reasonable men, consulting together coolly, could fail, by some mutual sacrifices of opinion, to form a compromise which was to save the Union." The discussion took place. Jefferson compromised with Hamilton that if we moved to the capital where Georgetown was, then he would get 2 of the Democratic members agreed to change their votes, and Hamilton undertook to carry the other point. Hamilton wanted tariffs. Due to the lack of revenue, Madison helped Congress understand to make revenue without taxation, we needed tariffs. The Tariff Act of 1789 was passed. This act gave a 5% or higher tariff. In 1791, the Excise Act was passed in Congress. This act made taxes possible. Hamilton taxed whiskey, and the Whiskey Rebellion started. In Washington's farewell address, he stated, "It is essential that you should practically bear in mind that towards the payment of debts there must be revenue, that to have revenue there must be taxes." Hamilton wanted a national bank in Philadelphia, with Congress being in Philadelphia temporarily, and the South were worried about the power imbalance. Madison also argued that the Constitution did not mention creating a national bank. With a vote of 39 to 20, the bank bill passed the House. 2 decades later, there was still opposition towards the bank, and Congress closed the bank. In 1815, the Second Bank of America was created and reinstated Hamilton's plan.